What happens when a sitting president is humiliated on a runway by a man who doesn't recognize power, until the most dangerous leader in the world picks up the phone. Location: Ouagadougou International Airport, dawn. The sun was just beginning to slice through the pale gray sky over Burkina Faso, casting long orange beams across the tarmac. The air was tense, the kind of stillness that arrives before something shatters. President Ibrahim Traore walked toward the private jet with his usual calm precision, his military boots pressing into the asphalt like he owned the earth beneath them. His green fatigues were pressed, his beret centered perfectly above his brow. But his eyes, sharp and restless, betrayed the storm brewing inside him. He wasn't just any president boarding a plane this morning. He was a man on the edge, the weight of a bleeding country on his back. Just days earlier, another village had been attacked. Another convoy of aid was ambushed. He was done asking questions, done waiting for help that never came. Russia had offered a lifeline, military aid, intelligence, something real. And now he was heading to Moscow to formalize what could be the boldest strategic shift in Burkina Faso's modern history. That is, until a man in a white shirt and navy blazer stepped out from the aircraft door. The pilot, white, tall, clean-shaven, French accent cutting through the air like a blade. "Mr. President, I'm sorry," he said, blocking the staircase. Traore didn't flinch. His entourage froze. The bodyguards reached for their weapons out of instinct, but the president raised one hand. "Excuse me?" he said, voice low, almost too calm. "There's been instructions," the pilot stammered. "I can't let you on. Orders from above. I was told not to fly you." Traore's eyes narrowed. "Who gave those orders?" The pilot hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the security cameras perched above the hangar. "France. My employer," he said softly. A thin silence blanketed the space. For a moment, even the birds seemed to stop mid-flight. Ibrahim stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing on the metal steps. The pilot took one involuntary step back. "You came to my land," Traore said. "You fly on my soil, and you think you can tell me where I can't go?" The pilot didn't respond, but his face turned pale. Without another word, Traore turned around, descended the steps, and signaled to his men. "Slash the tires," he said coldly. The guards didn't question it. Machetes and knives flashed in the morning sun as they went to work. Rubber screamed as the steel bit into it, one tire after another. The French pilot gasped, raising his voice. "No, that's a diplomatic aircraft. You can't do that." But the damage was already done. Traore turned to his aide. "Get every French asset out of my country. Today. They want war? They just declared it." The aide nodded and sprinted off. The president's face was unreadable. No fury. Just a cold, controlled silence, like a man who had spent months watching his people die and was now done playing the polite game. Then, just as he began walking away from the wrecked aircraft, a phone rang. Not his, the pilot's. He looked at the screen, his face drained of color. His hands shook. One of Traore's men cocked his head. "Who is it?" The pilot looked up, breath catching in his throat. It's the Kremlin." Time stopped. President Traore paused mid-step and turned around. The pilot picked up, hands trembling. "Achelou?" What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a command. Only one phrase was audible, echoing through the pilot's earpiece loud enough that everyone nearby heard it. "Let him through." The voice was heavy, unmistakable, President Vladimir Putin himself. The pilot swallowed hard. "Okay, sir. I'm sorry, sir." Click. He looked up. "You can board, Mr. President." There was a misunderstanding. Traore stared at him for a long moment, then walked forward slowly. The air crackled around him like a storm about to strike. He passed the pilot without a word, climbed the stairs, and disappeared inside the jet. The engines were silent, the tires flat, but everyone knew. The world had just changed. The sun had barely risen over the Seine when chaos erupted inside the Élysée Palace. Aides were racing between offices with files clutched to their chests. Phones were ringing. The French defense minister had just hung up after a short, brutal call from Moscow. He didn't say what had been said, but everyone could see it in his face. Something had gone horribly wrong. President Émile Durand entered the situation room with the cold fury of a man ambushed in his own home. "What do you mean Putin called the pilot directly?" he barked. The room went silent. His chief of intelligence, a woman in her late 50s with hair pinned tight against her skull, stepped forward. "We're still trying to confirm how he got the number." But the call came from a secure Kremlin line. It lasted 12 seconds. Durand stared at the monitors. A still image from Ouagadougou airport filled the screen. Ibrahim Traoré's boots climbing the steps of the jet, the shredded tires beneath him like broken teeth. "I want everyone out of Burkina Faso," Durand growled. "Embassy, assets, military advisors, mining officials. Shut it down. If Traoré wants to play this game, let's see how far he gets without us." "But sir," the intelligence chief began, "if we move out completely—" "Do it!" he snapped, slamming his palm onto the desk. But even he knew this wasn't a bold move. It was retreat, and Traoré knew it too. Cut to Russian Federation airspace, mid-flight. Inside the cabin, President Traoré sat in silence. The leather seats were pristine. A tray of untouched drinks sat near his elbow. Outside the windows, clouds drifted slowly, unaware of the geopolitical storm unfolding beneath them. Across from him sat his most trusted military commander, Colonel Zita, a man with tired eyes and an arm still healing from the last rebel ambush. "You made the call," Zita said. "They won't forget this." "They don't need to," Traoré replied. "They'll remember it every time they try to treat Africa like it's still theirs." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We've been dancing between Paris and Washington for too long. Every time we try to breathe, they send drones or they pull their so-called aid. Now we make our own way." Zita nodded slowly. "What do you think Putin wants in return?" Traoré smirked faintly. "Nothing is free, my friend. But at least he doesn't hide behind charity masks." Just then, the intercom crackled. The pilot's voice, now stripped of pride, came over the speakers. "Mr. President, we've been cleared to land in Moscow ahead of schedule. Kremlin representatives are waiting on the tarmac." Traoré stood up, straightening his jacket. "Good," he said. "Let's remind the world what happens when you try to humiliate a soldier in his own land." Cut to Kremlin tarmac, Moscow, 3 hours later. The Russian cold greeted them like a slap, sharp, sudden, unforgettable. Snowflakes drifted lazily as President Traoré stepped onto Russian soil, flanked by 2 Burkinabe soldiers. Cameras flashed. Journalists shouted questions. But none of them got a response. Not yet. Waiting at the bottom of the steps was a man in a dark overcoat, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes like winter steel. Sergei Lavrov. He extended his hand. "President Traoré, welcome." Traoré shook it firmly. "I come with fire in my veins, Minister. My country has bled enough." Lavrov nodded solemnly. "Then let's give your enemies something to fear." As the convoy pulled away from the airfield, Russian military officials leaned in and whispered among themselves. This visit wasn't symbolic anymore. It was strategic. France had just been shoved out of West Africa, and Russia was stepping in. But what no one knew yet was what Traoré had brought with him. The room was carved from stone and secrecy. Deep underground, beneath Moscow's oldest military wing, President Ibrahim Traoré sat flanked by Russian generals and advisors in a chamber thick with tension and the scent of cold steel. Maps of Africa spread across the massive table. Satellite images, red zones, lines drawn and redrawn over the Sahel region. Sergei Lavrov stood at the head of the room. "Mr. President, you didn't just arrive with a request. You arrived with leverage." Traoré's expression didn't change. He knew the Russians weren't offering help out of goodwill, but out of interest. Still, this was exactly where he needed to be. He gestured to his aide, who opened a secured case. Inside, a flash drive, an encrypted report, and photographs. One of the Russian generals leaned forward. "What are we looking at?" French operatives, Traoré said calmly, embedded in gold and lithium mines across Burkina Faso, smuggling under the cover of contracts, undermining our sovereignty. I want it exposed, and I want your satellites watching every inch of their exit. A slow, impressed murmur rippled across the room. Lavrov took the drive without a word, handed it to his aide, and then Saturday so. You want eyes, weapons, and a defense pact. Traoré nodded. And not a single boot on our soil without my signature. Lavrov offered a thin smile. That can be arranged. A beat passed. Then Lavrov added almost too casually, you should know. The pilot. He was not acting on orders. Traoré's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? Lavrov leaned in, voice low. The denial was not from Paris. It was from Washington. The room froze. What? Traoré asked, his voice dangerously soft. Our intelligence intercepted chatter. The pilot had 2 calls before denying you access. One from his company in Paris. The second from a U.S. liaison in Djibouti. Zita tensed beside Traoré. They knew you were coming here, Lavrov said, and they tried to stop it before you left the ground. The silence now was deafening. Traoré's hands balled into fists. He wasn't just dealing with post-colonial arrogance anymore. This was global sabotage. Then it's settled, he said. You're not just my ally now. You're my shield. Lavrov nodded once. And you, Mr. President, are our wedge into West Africa. A pact was sealed, not with signatures, but with eyes and the mutual understanding that war no longer needed battlefields. As the lights dimmed and the security files were locked away, Traoré rose from his chair with a silent oath in his chest. He hadn't been denied entry that morning. He'd been reborn with enemies on every border, and now a nuclear-backed shadow behind him. The sun beat down unforgivingly on the capital, but no one looked up. Every eye was locked on the convoy snaking out of the French military base. Armored trucks, supply carriers, personnel carriers packed with soldiers who dared not meet the stares of the locals lining the streets. President Traoré's orders had been swift and unrelenting. Full French withdrawal within 48 hours.
No delay. No negotiation.
It wasn't just a diplomatic decision. It was an announcement the era of subservience was over. Hundreds of Burkinabe citizens stood on sidewalks and rooftops, some waving miniature national flags, others simply watching in tense silence. Their country had become a battleground not just of weapons, but of pride, and this was their victory parade. Near the gates of the French outpost, the final officer, a colonel with a chest full of medals and a face full of defeat, handed over keys and documents to a Burkinabe commander. "You'll regret this," the colonel muttered under his breath. The commander didn't blink. "We've regretted your presence long enough." The colonel gave a stiff nod, then turned and climbed into the last vehicle. As the gates creaked shut behind the convoy, a massive iron sign was lowered in its place. Base restitue à la nation, restored to the nation. The words echoed through social media in real time, blasting across West African networks, into North African headlines, and even crawling reluctantly into French news tickers. But it wasn't just the people cheering. Inside the Ministry of Defense in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood beside Colonel Zita, overlooking the digital map showing the now vacated French bases. Dots were disappearing in real time. "How many left?" Traoré asked. Zita scanned the tablet. "All. They're gone." Traoré let out a slow breath. "And the mines?" "Secured. Our forces have replaced every French contract. The Russians sent advisors, discreet but effective." Traoré nodded. "Make sure the mines serve the people now. Not Moscow. Not Paris. Us." Zita gave a rare smile. "Understood." At that moment, a voice crackled over the comm system. "Mr. President, you'll want to see this." On screen, live footage began to stream from a northern province. A French truck, clearly marked, had been abandoned and set ablaze by local villagers. No violence, just fire and cheers. It wasn't sanctioned. It wasn't ordered. It was raw anger finally unshackled. Traoré watched in silence. He had lit a fuse. The question now wasn't whether it would burn, but who it would reach next. In a sealed room beneath the Pentagon, the kind reserved for conversations no journalist would ever overhear, 6 men sat around a circular table under low lighting. The insignia of the Department of Defense loomed behind them like a silent observer. A screen in the center displayed satellite images of Ouagadougou, French equipment abandoned, Russian supply crates being offloaded discreetly, and Ibrahim Traore speaking to cheering crowds. One man, General Morrison, leaned back with a deep scowl. "He's more dangerous than we thought." The CIA liaison beside him rubbed his temple. "You said denying him that flight would delay his Russia pivot, that it would shake him." "I misjudged him," Morrison muttered. Clearly, another image flickered on the screen, Traoré inside the Kremlin, side by side with Lavrov. The image was blurry, but the implications were sharp. "We've created a vacuum," someone else whispered.
No, Morrison corrected.
"He created it. We just exposed how far he's willing to go to fill it." A younger official, NSA, tapped his tablet. Interception confirms his next step. He's negotiating with Mali and Niger for a regional security alliance. He's forming a military bloc. Morrison stood. "If they unite under Russian protection, we lose access to everything. Minerals, trade routes, counterterrorism zones." The silence that followed was thick with something unspoken. Not fear, but recognition. This wasn't just a Burkina Faso problem anymore. This was West Africa realigning before their eyes. "Then destabilize it," Morrison said coldly. The CIA man raised a brow. "You're suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Morrison said, stepping toward the exit. "But if he wants to play in Moscow's shadow, make him pay for the shade." Cut to Moscow that night. Traoré's phone buzzed twice. Unknown number. He answered anyway. No voice on the other end, just static. Then, a mechanical click. And then, a message in perfect French. "You've made your choice. Soon, your people will regret it." The line went dead. Colonel Zita, sitting across from him, looked up. "Something wrong." Traoré's eyes didn't leave the phone. "They're watching." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the snowy skyline of Moscow. Below, a convoy of Russian vehicles was preparing to deliver his new weapons package to the airport. "They won't attack me head-on," he said. "They'll come for the people. Turn them against me." Zita rose. "Then we give them something stronger to believe in." Traoré turned, his face grim. "Then we give them a revolution." The earth trembled before the fire came. Djibo, a dusty settlement near the Mali border, had become a symbol of resilience, a town that refused to fall despite repeated insurgent attacks. But on this day it was something else. A trap. At 3:14 a.m., an explosion shattered the silence. Flames lit the horizon. The Burkinabe outpost, recently reinforced with Russian arms, was under siege. They came fast, coordinated, trained, not like the ragtag rebels from months past. These men moved like phantoms through the night, black gear, Western-style helmets, and silent rifles. Captain Salif, stationed at the post, barked orders through the smoke. "Hold the line. Don't give them the perimeter." But it was too late. The attackers were inside. In less than 12 minutes, 2 ammo tents were gone, 5 soldiers killed, and communications jammed. Only one thing was clear: this was no terrorist raid. Back in Ouagadougou, the emergency alert jolted President Traoré from a restless nap. Still dressed in fatigues, he strode into the command center barefoot, eyes bloodshot but burning with fury. Zita met him at the screen. "Satellite confirms. These weren't jihadists." Traoré's fists tightened. "Who then?" Zita hesitated. "We intercepted comms. Speaking English. American English." Traoré stared at him. "Mercenaries." Zita nodded. "Private contractors. Not officially linked. But someone paid them and trained them." The map on the screen lit up in red. More movement along the northern corridor. It wasn't just Djibo. The attacks were spreading. "They're trying to fracture us before the Russia deal kicks in," Zita said. "Make the people question your leadership." Traoré's voice was a low growl. They think chaos is a strategy. But I was born in war. He walked over to the microphone connected to the national emergency broadcast. He spoke, live and unfiltered. To the people of Burkina Faso, this morning we were attacked, not by terrorists but by ghosts wearing foreign boots. They want you afraid. They want me gone. But I will not kneel, and neither should you. Then, the twist no one expected. He added, as of this moment, I am activating the People's Defense Corps. Every town will be trained, armed, and equipped. We will no longer wait for protection. We will be our own army. Across the country, families listening in tiny homes and dusty markets paused. Young men and women looked up. The revolution had just been deputized. He wasn't just fighting back. He was rewriting the rules of national defense with his citizens at the front. A storm was gathering, but not the kind born from clouds. Just before dawn, a convoy of 20 Russian military transport trucks snaked through the savannah outside Ouagadougou. The lead vehicle, painted in dull camouflage, bore no markings, no flags, just silent purpose. Inside one of the containers, sealed under biometric lock, lay what would tip the scales. High-tech drone systems, communication jammers, anti-tank launchers, and among them, a crate marked only with a black symbol, Z7. Its contents? Known only to a handful of Russian intelligence officers and President Ibrahim Traore himself. Colonel Zita trailed the convoy in a military jeep, eyes scanning every hill, every shadow in the grass. Burkina Faso's air was thick with dust and tension. The People's Defense Corps had already begun forming in villages, but they were still disorganized. If anything happened to this shipment, their momentum would shatter. A soldier radioed in from the second truck. Roadblock ahead. Unidentified. Zita grabbed his rifle. No French, no American. No one stops this convoy. He exited the jeep, walked toward the lead truck, and saw them. 6 men standing in the middle of the road. Civilian clothes. No visible weapons. But their posture told another story. Who are you? Zita demanded. One of the men raised his hands slowly. We're locals. We heard rumors. Russian weapons. Is it true? Zita stepped closer, rifle leveled. Step back. This road is restricted. But just as the man began to retreat, his wrist flicked. Flashbang. The world erupted in light and thunder. Gunfire followed, but it wasn't ordinary gunfire. Silenced bursts, precise, tactical. 3 Russian drivers went down. Another truck swerved, tires shredded by a landmine hidden in the gravel. Zita hit the ground hard, rolled, and fired into the bush. He clipped one of the attackers, who screamed in English before collapsing. Seconds later, reinforcements from the rear arrived. Burkinabe soldiers armed with new Russian rifles. The tide turned fast. By the time the dust settled, 4 attackers were dead, 2 captured, and one of the trucks had been opened. Zita sprinted over. The Z7 crate was still there, but something was wrong. The biometric lock had been tampered with. The Russian technician examined it quickly. It was nearly breached. Another 10 seconds and they'd have seen what's inside. Zita cursed under his breath. Someone told them. They weren't just locals. They were planted. Fed intel. He turned to the captives, now zip-tied and bloodied. Interrogate them. If they breathe Washington, I want proof. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré received the update without emotion. They failed, Zita told him. But they were too close. We have a leak. Traoré's voice dropped to a whisper. Then we smoke the leak out. From the inside. The city looked calm from above. Streetlights flickering like fireflies, cars gliding slowly through narrow roads, a silence broken only by the distant hum of generators. But inside the walls of the Intelligence Bureau, the tension was stifling. President Traoré stood behind a one-way mirror, watching a man sweat under a single overhead bulb. The prisoner, one of the convoy attackers, had finally broken. Not under pain, but after hearing a single name whispered in his ear. A name that shouldn't have existed in Burkina Faso. Langston. Colonel Zita stood beside Traoré, eyes narrowed. Langston's CIA. Confirmed. Operated in Libya, then Mali. Disappeared 2 years ago. He didn't disappear, Traore said coldly. He embedded. Zita looked at the prisoner again. A thin man, American accent, barely 30. So he recruited locals, staged an ambush, and tried to breach our delivery. And now he knows we're onto him, Traore replied. Which means we have to act fast. He turned to his aide. Initiate Phantom Hawk. The aide hesitated. Sir, that's never been activated. Then we make history. Cut to abandoned warehouse, eastern outskirts of Ouagadougou, 2 hours later. Langston was already on the move. Dressed in desert gear, he moved like a ghost through alleys and forgotten roads. He knew his cover was blown. The failed ambush confirmed it. Extraction wasn't scheduled for another 24 hours, but he wouldn't make it that long. At least, not without hiding. He ducked into a warehouse, made his way to a back room where a burner phone waited, already wired to a private sat relay. But as he reached for it, the lights flared on. Dozens of flashlights, rifles raised. Traore's elite Phantom Hawk unit surrounded him. A task force only whispered about, trained in silence, and deployed only when the stakes were existential. Langston raised both hands. Impressive. So you do have your own CIA. From the shadows, Traore stepped forward himself.
No.
We have something better, loyalty. Langston chuckled, calm despite the rifles trained on him. You won't get anything out of me. I don't need to, Traore replied. You already told me everything, by showing your face. Langston's smirk faded. Now I know where your base is, who you sent, what you feared, and that tells me more than any interrogation. The silence in the warehouse thickened. Langston stared at him. You're making powerful enemies. Traore stepped closer, nose to nose. So are they. He turned. Take him alive. We'll let Moscow interrogate him. As Langston was dragged away, shouting something about Geneva Conventions, Traore lit a cigarette, his first in years, and watched the flames crackle from a nearby oil drum. They wanted to stop his journey to Russia. Now they'd handed him a new weapon, proof of foreign sabotage, and he was just getting started. The room wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. The significance was carved in presence, not gold. 3 presidents sat at a plain wooden table inside a tightly guarded military compound. Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, Abdurrahmane Tiani of Niger, and Assimi Goïta of Mali.
No suites. No ceremony.
Just uniforms, scars, and a shared resolve forged through betrayal. Maps were spread out. Drone photos, satellite grids, intel from Russian briefings. At the center, a joint proposal. A unified regional military alliance, backed by Russia, designed to counter both insurgents and foreign manipulation. ECOWAS won't like this, Goïta muttered. Let them not like it, Traore snapped. We're done asking permission to protect our people. President Tiani looked toward the window. His voice was low. You're sure they're targeting civilians now? Traore nodded. The attack in Djibo was just the beginning. If we don't unify now, they'll pick us off one by one. Soft coups disguised as stabilization efforts. It's the same script, just a new director. A silence passed. Then Tiani said, we don't just need soldiers. We need morale. If our people believe in this, it lasts. If not, it collapses like another puppet union. Traore reached into his folder and pulled out a draft speech. We give them something to believe in. Cut to the Grand Plaza, Ouagadougou 1 week later. Tens of thousands gathered beneath the scorching sun. Some climbed rooftops. Others leaned from balconies. All eyes locked onto the massive digital screen broadcasting the event live. Traore stood on the steps of the People's Assembly with Goïta and Tiani flanking him. Behind them, the flags of 3 nations. Above them, a new banner, black, red, and gold, with 3 raised fists joined together. A voice echoed over loudspeakers. My brothers, my sisters, today, history changes course. Cheers erupted. Today, we reject manipulation. From Paris, from Washington, from any hand that dares hold our neck while claiming to offer help. Today, we unite as one bloc. Not in theory, not in spirit, but in blood, code, and defense. People shouted. Drums beat. He raised his fist. The Sahel will no longer be a chessboard. We are no one's pawn. We are players now. Across West Africa, radios buzzed. TVs flickered. Social media exploded. The message was clear. The Sahel had formed its own wall and dared the world to test it. Inside a dark room in Paris, President Durand watched the speech unfold. He didn't speak, but his trembling hand crushed a wine glass in silence. The chamber was packed, not just with diplomats, but with tension so thick it choked the room. Screens lit up with real-time feeds from Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, while delegates whispered nervously behind folded nameplates. At the center of the storm, a resolution, proposed by France, co-signed by the US, Germany, and Canada. Its language was clinical. Sanctions on Burkina Faso and its allied regimes for unauthorized military realignments and potential destabilization of regional governance. But the subtext was nuclear. Punish Traoré for his defiance. Cripple his alliance. Freeze every route to Russian partnership. The French ambassador spoke first. President Traoré's actions endanger not only the stability of the Sahel, but the entire framework of international cooperation. He has expelled partners, welcomed weapons, and emboldened insurgency. Then came the US ambassador. This isn't about sovereignty. It's about reckless alliances with known aggressors. We must contain this before it spreads. The camera panned to the Russian representative. Arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't speak until all the Western nations had finished. Then he rose slowly. "Mr. President," he said, addressing the council chair. "What my colleagues call destabilization, I call liberation. What they call recklessness, I call self-defense." He placed a single photo on the desk in front of him. A burned convoy in Djibo, a mother crying over her son. This was done not by rebels, but by mercenaries. Who funds them, we all know. But say nothing. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The US delegate shifted uncomfortably. Russia wasn't defending Traoré anymore. They were flipping the script. Moments later, the vote began. France, yes. US, yes. UK, abstain. Germany, yes.
Russia, no.
China, no. With China's rejection, the sanctions stalled. Blocked. In Burkina Faso, Traoré received the news without a smile. "They'll come a different way now," he said. "Dirtier, slower, but just as sharp." Colonel Zita looked up from a new intelligence report. "They already are." Cut to rural market Kudugu the next morning. Two men unloaded vegetables from a dusty truck. Another adjusted a stall sign, but hidden beneath the crates, a listening device blinked silently. Across the street, a shopkeeper with no real shop whispered into a burner phone. Phase 2 confirmed. Civil agitation cell embedded. Fuel protests in 3 days. Funds wired. A different war was beginning. One without uniforms. One where fear walked on invisible feet. But President Traoré had seen it coming. He picked up the red phone beside his desk and gave the order. Activate Black Echo. A plan built in secret. To protect the nation not from tanks, but from narratives. This time, the enemy wouldn't come through the skies. They'd come through whispers.